You're watching The Roach on Florida TV.
Talk about a subject that just somehow pisses the Democrats off to no end. Donald Trump and not showing his taxes. Donald Trump not showing his taxes. Can he do this from an economic standpoint, from where you sit? Can he just say, screw all of you, I don't need to show you this?
Well, this is a very interesting issue, because the one question is, why doesn't he want to show his taxes? And you might say, oh, well, maybe he was dishonest. I don't think so. I suspect that he was perfectly honest and followed the law to the letter. And so you say, well, maybe he doesn't want people to know that he didn't pay any income tax. And I would say, no, I think he's proud of the fact that he didn't pay any income tax. As a matter of fact, he would want people to know that he was smart enough to not have to pay any income tax. So the idea that he had done something wrong or that he didn't want people to know that he didn't pay income tax, that's really not the issue. The issue is, why was he able to get away without paying income tax? That's the real issue. And when we look at that, we can see there's specific loopholes. Internal Revenue Code 469, Internal Revenue Code 482. So there's specific loopholes that he took advantage of. Randy, do you own any property?
Just one.
Okay. And do you rent out that property at all?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, then you wouldn't be under Internal Revenue Code 469, because you have to have done property management. And you have to have done 750 hours of property management during the tax year in order to take advantage of this loophole. So, and this doesn't mean cutting your grass and raking your leaves. This means it's financial transactions of renting it out, finding renters, doing the transactions with the bank. If you spend 750 hours or more, or hire someone to spend 750 hours or more on your property. So if you have a $100 million property, then you could write off $4 million on your income tax. But the whole idea of this write-off was your property depreciates over time. You ever notice the roof, the shingles on the roof start to wear out over time, and maybe around your windows, it begins to rot? Well, if you don't rent out your property, then you don't take advantage of this. But the idea was to compensate people for the depreciation of these rental properties. And so, but the problem is that if instead of depreciating, your property actually appreciated, let's say that the original property was $100 million, but now you bought it from somebody else who had it at $100 million, you bought it for $200 million. Now, instead of writing off $4 million, you get to write off $8 million. Now, wait a minute, this was supposed to be designed to help people whose property depreciated. But the way the bill was written is when the property appreciates, you get even to write off even more for depreciation. The property doubled in value, which is an appreciation, and you got to double the amount you're writing off in depreciation. I mean, this is about as perverse as you could get. These loopholes are designed for the property developers, like President Donald Trump, to not have to pay the income tax.
Yeah, and let's be clear, he's not doing anything illegal. It's the law. So what you're essentially saying is if we probably got a hold of his tax returns, he probably did nothing illegal, but we'd probably see years where he paid zero or very limited amount of taxes. And it's going to anger a lot of the American folks. Like, how is that possible that you made $1 billion and you didn't pay a penny in tax?
And it's even worse with Internal Revenue Code 482, because if you have a brand name, and in my Optimal Money Flow book, I use the brand name Sterling, but you could use the brand name Trump. And what you do is you've got this brand name that you've established, but then you decide that you're going to sell your brand name to a company in the Cayman Islands. So you sell your brand name to the company in the Cayman Islands, but then you need to use your brand name. So you have to pay that company in the Cayman Islands some fee for using the brand name. Well, how much of a fee? Well, that's a pretty good brand name. I'm going to have to pay a lot of money for that brand name, which reduces, that goes from your revenues, it reduces your profits. So in the United States, your profits have dropped dramatically. There's only one catch. You know who owns that company in the Cayman Islands? You do. You got the rest.
That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, this is legal. I have students that served in the Internal Revenue Service for 30 years or so, And I check with them on all this, and they say, yeah, it's really hard for us to evaluate these brand names and this type of, and then there's inputs. If you are a manufacturer in the United States and you're producing inputs into your products in other countries, then you can pretend that those inputs are worth a tremendous amount. And then that reduces the revenues, because that's a cost that reduces, that is subtracted from your revenues in calculating your profits.
Yeah.
So there's tricks. And so what's really happening, Randy, is you and I have to pay for that aircraft carrier. We're paying, somebody has to pay for the aircraft carrier. If these other people, these wheeler dealers, are not paying their share, we're paying their share for them. We're paying our own share plus their share of that aircraft carrier. So we're getting screwed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I always think the Democrats sort of didn't articulate these types of points very well. They just always said, let's clamp down on the rich. And really what they should have been talking about are a variety of tax loopholes like the one you're talking about. That's really what going after the wealthy you need to do, because you've created a world where they're going to pay no taxes. And then to me, this all comes back down to my initial conversation about debt and who's going to pay for the taxes, who's going to pay for the roads, who is going to pay for all the things that need to be done in the United States when many very wealthy people and large corporations are going to pay zero or very little in taxes. Who are you going to collect the money from?
Well, I'll tell you, Randy, it's not that I have anything against the wealthy. I came from a very wealthy family. My father, as I said, was a Wall Street banker. His father was a corporate lawyer in New York, and they were very wealthy. As a matter of fact, my father, we lived in Westfield, New Jersey, and every morning my mom would take my dad to the train station to take the train into New York. And she would take me along, of course. And then I noticed as we stopped at, there was one street, the one stop sign, there was a bus stop. And this was in the 1950s. And my father would wave to this man who would then wave back. And this went on day after day after day. And the thing that I found unusual was the man was an African American. And I said to my father, because I didn't know any African Americans, it was very segregated back in the 1950s. And I said to my father, well, who is this man that you're waving to? And he said, oh, I don't really know him. We just wave to each other. And I thought, well, that's very strange. And then one day my father took me along because my grandparents had died and they had left the estate. They had a large estate. And so he took us to the estate, or took me to the estate, and he talked with the butler, this African-American butler. And the African-American butler, as soon as he saw me, he said to my father, oh, Mr. Marsh, you need to take your son to the emergency room right away. And I said, well, my father said, why? I said, oh, his thumb, it's going to go gangrene. It's all swollen, it's red, And so my father said, oh, okay. So my father took me to Orange Memorial Hospital, and the doctors looked at it and they injected me with needles put something to stop the gangrene. And then I realized this African American was very smart. He saved my life. So first thing I did when I got to college is I joined the NAACP, because I realized that this man had saved my life and he was very smart, and that they were not being treated fairly. People were making it sound like that the African Americans. And then I realized why my father liked the African Americans so much. When he was a little boy, these were his good friends. The children of the servants were his good friends. So now in my book, just to show I'm really not hostile towards wealthy people, is I have
wait a second. I don't think you're hostile towards wealthy people. What I'm saying is that these loopholes need to be closed up, because somebody has to, maybe I was misunderstood, somebody has to pay the taxes. Somehow the roads got to get paved. The city services need to be done. The airports need to be rebuilt. So what I'm saying is that as long as you allow people, large corporations, to not pay a significant tax bill or some tax bill, how are you going to pay for these things? Where are the tax revenues going to come from if you don't tax people? Because we're writing checks for people now. We write a check now. We're paying off the problems we had in 2007, 2008. We're bailing out the banks. We're bailing out other services from when we had that economic problem, the car companies. Where is this money going to come from if nobody's contributing to this giant fund?
Right. So we really do need to tax the wealthier people more. And I think especially the estate tax and the inheritance taxes, but other taxes as well. And as long as we do it on a very fair basis. And the other thing, of course, is getting rid of these tax loopholes. I mean, they're not even, Warren Buffett explained that he was only paying like 17% tax, and his office help was paying much higher rate of income tax. So he was thinking, gee, he has all his billions of dollars, and yet he's paying a much lower rate than his office staff.
Yeah, and I think that's the point I was alluding to, that, and maybe I just wasn't clear on it, but the fact that, a lot of these corporations have these loopholes, and they have a year or a cycle where they're paying zero tax. And I just think the average American is thinking, oh, yeah, you just want to tax the rich. No, I think you really want to close these loopholes so they pay a fair tax. And that's why the flat tax has been an interesting, discussion over the years. When you buy a yacht, you don't get to just deduct it. You pay the tax on that purchase, just like you would anything else as a sales tax. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, there's no tax on these financial transactions. When I'm buying stocks and bonds, I don't pay a tax. Yeah. And yet other people have to pay tax for their bread or whatever they buy. Which is
bizarre. Yeah.
So there's distortions there they're not just loopholes. There's a whole bunch of rigged. The system is definitely rigged, but it's rigged in favor of the wealthiest people who, in some sense, got too caught up in it. It's not that they're evil people. It's just that they got too caught up in the game.
That's where I was saying I think the Democrats are going after it the wrong way, because I agree with people that are wealthy. How much do you want to tax me? 50, 75%? What's the number that you're going to be happy taking away from me? And I don't think that's the way they should have been framing the argument. What they should have been talking is about these tax loopholes, as you pointed out there. That's really where the money should be coming from, not the average rich American just because they make good money. They shouldn't be taxed at 75%. It didn't work in Great Britain, and it's not going to work here in America. You can only take so much money from these people. But when you're not paying, like what you explained with the real estate, I think that's where you can collect better tax revenues.
And even these 75% tax rates are only they're marginal tax rates. That's not the average tax rate. That's the additional money above and beyond $1 million or $5 million or $10 million. That high rate only applies to the dollars above a certain level. So the rich people are getting taxed at exactly the same rate as the poor people on the first,
Yeah, right.
So it's really the marginal tax rate and the average tax rate can be much, much different from one another.
Yeah, and bottom line is we somehow have to collect taxes and we have to pay for things. So I don't get it, and that's why, I'm not an economist.
No more Roach on Florida TV.